when I was trained, educated in the area of church growth, which often has negative connotations with people today, which is kind of sad because if a church is growing healthy, it is becoming a force for the kingdom. So, but I'm not going to get into that. But when I was growing, one of the things that when I was growing up or listening to people speak about it, or then when I went to seminary and I was formally trained in some of these areas, one thing we would hear in the area of church growth were some of the metrics. And one of the more common metrics was if your church is 80% full, it's full. Kind of truism, a truism that is based upon something that is 80% full looks full. And so even if you have 20% vacancy, the eyes of the person coming in thinks it's a little bit too full and it may discourage them from returning. Back in the day when malls were really popular, um, malls would build as if at their peak season, usually Christmas and Thanksgiving, that they would have 20% vacancy even when everybody had a parking spot, just so that there could be the appearance that there would always be space. The times have changed. Many malls are declining or do not exist today. The 80% rule is being challenged in a lot of different ways, but it's not completely gone. And we're going to talk about that in this Church Answers podcast. And with this Church Answers podcast, as always, we thank Belay. They have this download called The Power of Productivity. You can get it by going to Thom at 55123, or just contact Belay directly at belaysolutions.com. Tell them what your need is. Hey, we need a bookkeeper. We need a virtual assistant. Tell them what your need is and see if they can match you, because they are the best at that, and they do all the work for you. They provide the payroll. They provide all the back end work. They do everything for you. So it's a great opportunity to really make your church or your organization a truly God-given, stewardship-like, productive organization. Thank you, Belay. Okay, let's get to this metric. When is a worship center full? All right, the first thing I want to say is the 80% rule is not all bad. It is a psychological reality. Of course, 80% is not precise. It could be 82, it could be 78. It's just when something is getting toward being full, which is around 80%, it looks full. So the first thing that I want to say here is that 80% is not a bad rule of thumb even today. I do think it's changing, and I want to talk about how it's changing. I do think it's changing, but don't throw it out just because it was something that those church growth people, that all that they were cared about were numbers, nickels, and noses, which isn't true either. But don't throw it out, because there's some good to that. It's at least telling you once your auditorium, your worship center, your sanctuary begins to get in that 80% full range, it really feels full. And there's a psychological effect where the peripheral members or non-Christians are not going to come if it feels too full. So don't throw that particular percentage out. Another thing I want to talk about is pews versus chairs. Boy, this is a deep theological subject, but we get this question all the time. What's best, pews or chairs? It depends. Advantages to some, advantages to others. One of the advantages to pews is you can reconfigure. Chairs, you can reconfigure them. You can, if you expect a smaller crowd, you can move chairs in, move them out. You can space them differently. There's all kind of advantages to chairs, but there are advantages to pews too. With pews, you have a little more leeway in the rule. And what I'm saying is, with chairs, you can tell one person takes up one chair. Okay? That's just the way chairs work. And if a chair is empty, you see it's empty. But with a pew, someone can take up 1.5 spaces just to give themselves a little distance from the next person, or perhaps to put a female to put their purse down, or male or female to put their Bible down. They're usually not going to do that in a chair. They're not going to go to the chair right next to them unless there's plenty of room and put their belongings there. So pews have a little more give on those, because people can come into there and they can look like they're taking up one space, but they're really taking up two. And so the percentage would not necessarily have to be as high as 80% before you begin to do something about it. So first thing we want to say is the 80% rule is good. The second thing that we want to say is that pews and chairs both have their different advantages. What else is it about capacity? We think today that the perceived full capacity is somewhere between 60 and 70%. Again, when you start using percentages and numbers like this, you don't have precision. You don't know exactly what the numbers are. But what we're saying here is because of COVID and because of, you remember social distancing? I mean, it hadn't been that long ago. Because of COVID, now we are seeing that a worship center, sanctuary that is 50 or 60% full, it doesn't bother people as much as it used to, quite frankly. It doesn't feel vacuous. It feels a little bit on the normal side. People got used to spatial distancing during COVID, and it seems to have carried on. So these churches, I'm thinking of one church in particular that's spreading around 600 people over 3 services, but the capacity of their sanctuary is 550. So it could seem to feel vacuous, but in 2 of the services where there are around 200 people in a sanctuary of 550, it does not feel that bad because we've gotten accustomed to more spatial distancing. So what was perceived as full in the past does not necessarily have to feel that way today. And another thing that we'll say about this particular rule, the 80% rule, the 60% rule, again, we're saying 60 to 70 is more you're getting to feel full once you're at 60 to 70. You say, now, Tom, why is it 60 or 70 versus 80? Well, I just want to be clear on that. It is because space is becoming something that is expected and does not make it feel like people are missing. Am I making sense? In other words, in the past, if you were under 80% full, it wouldn't feel full because there was too much space in there. Now, if you're at 60%, maybe 70%, it still feels okay because people have gotten used to space between them, whether it's in a movie theater, whether it's in a church, whether it's in line for a bank teller, which, of course, those are disappearing as well, but that's another story for another time. 60 to 70 is probably the full, but again, things are changing and we got to keep a watch on it. Finally, let me just simply say this. The space distance, how much you can occupy before it feels full, the 80% or the 60 or 70, it is a figure that we can say beyond a shadow of a doubt is now more lenient toward fewer people. But at the same time, it not only applies to worship centers, it applies to parking as well. And there are possibly some other things like classrooms if you have on-site groups or Sunday school classes, but parking as well. And so one of the things you have to look at as you're looking at space within your sanctuary, how does it align with parking? And if it's out of line, that can be a big problem in itself. That is a story for another time. Okay, so what have we learned? We have learned that the 80% rule has some validity, but it's probably more like the 60 or 70% rule. What have we learned? That pews can give you a little more of a full feeling with fewer people than chairs can. What have we learned? That things like parking lots are subject to the same rule. And the final thing, when is it too empty? Again, that's speculative, but I would say once you get down to 40%, it really begins to feel empty. 50 is starting that way, but down to 40% full, it's really beginning to feel empty. So if you have a 500-seat sanctuary and you have 200 attending, you are at the beginning point of it feeling too vacuous. Those are some of the things that we're learning here. There's a lot more. I just wanted to give you this bite-sized nugget to chew on, to spit out, to swallow, whatever you want to do, because we're seeing this change, and it's not unimportant, but it's certainly not the most important thing. All right. Thank you, as always, for Belay. Don't forget, they are the productivity experts. Don't forget to download The Power of Productivity at THOM 55123. That's Thom, THOM, at 55123. And we'll see you, or we'll hear from you, in the next episode. See you then.